something happening here. But what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Salutations, New Haven. Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations, the world. Welcome to WNHH 103.5 FM New Haven, where community radio rules, no commercials, just the stuff that matters, and we pack the hour with hope today. So I want to begin before my guest introduce himself in the show, just with a little story, because the news has been so tough this past 2 weeks with Renee Nicole Good and all the kinds of, looks like our country is falling apart. But I remember there was another time our country was falling apart. It was 1963. And Dr. King would give his I Have a Dream speech. And I have my purple on today because purple is majestic. And you wear the majestic color when you honor the elders who lead the way, who are the stepping stones to the future. And so I just wanted to share a brief story before we begin. When I was 8 years old, I didn't really pay much attention to anything but, hey, where were the Yankees? Hey, not Babe Ruth, but Mickey Mantle was still playing for the Yankees and stuff. And I watched that. But during that time, my grandfather, who was 68 at the time, a veteran of World War I, he decided that he should go to Washington, D.C., to the March on Washington, to see Dr. King and support this work of a march for jobs and freedom and justice, all that stuff. And he was that kind of old guy that did that. But during that time, and people forget that people were afraid, because wherever Black people gathered in large numbers, trust me, it was like the ice show that's going on in Minneapolis now. They were often met with violence over there. So what happens is my grandfather wants to go. He goes to the church. He's got a brand new Dodge. He's excited about it. I'll drive. I'll pay for the gas. I'll buy the coffee. And he goes to church and asks who will come with him. And no one would come. He's the union shop steward. He goes to the union hall and asks, will someone come with him? And no one will come with him. He's a veteran of foreign wars and the BFW hall, and he goes there and he asks, will someone come with him? And no one would come. Now, meanwhile, there's a little tension in the house. My grandmother and my mother did not want him to go to D.C. They were deadly afraid of what would happen, their old man in D.C. And they were kind of glad when nobody wanted to come, and they thought he would push it aside. But he didn't push it aside. He said, I'm going. And so the drive was from Trenton, New Jersey to D.C. I don't know, it's probably about a 4-hour drive. And somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, he's getting ready to leave. And my mother said, oh boy, this old man will fall asleep at the wheel. Could we send the boy with him? The boy, the 8-year-old boy. And so quickly, I don't even know how it was in AM house. I'm put on, and let me tell you, I was dressed pretty much like I am now. My grandfather had a wool suit on. This is DC. This is 97, 100-degree weather in August. And they put it all and dressed me up, but I have no idea what's going on over there. But they said, this boy can't shut up. He'll keep the old man awake. And so we went to D.C., and I could tell you that I don't remember a lot about that day. But I knew, first of all, I never saw so many Black people in my life in there. Never saw so many people in my life. And I saw some of the things that went on with, like, Peter, Paul, and Mary came on. And I don't know if they did Blowing in the Wind or something. They sang a song, and I recognized them because they were on TV sometime. And so when we were there, and most of the day, people weren't paying attention. Some of them, sometimes they were, some of them weren't. But all that day, there were literally, I'd say, dozens and dozens of speakers and performers coming to the podium. And I don't remember much about any of them, except that when Dr. King came to the podium, and Dr. King said, I have a dream. Let me tell you, you could hear a pin drop. And I remember being swept off my feet and my grandfather put me on his shoulders. I remember that day. And on that day, hope bloomed. And I think it's you wear purple to majestic. I think when times are hard and we struggle, we look to our heroes. Now let's put Dr. King aside because his work continues on. And my next guest, I believe, is continuing some of that work, particularly in our schools. So, Joe Slovic, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, you were right. You did butcher it. It's Joseph Kalovic. Yeah. I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. Came up in a single parent household with my mom. Um, Not well to do at all. We were struggling on welfare, food stamps for a long time. Grew up in basically poor neighborhoods, surrounded by diversity. Um, yeah, so it was a struggle coming up. So I know the struggle. I know what it's like to struggle and not to have, but I don't know the struggle and what not to have. Speaking of Dr. King and have being a person of color holding you back as well. I'll never be able to experience that, but I can emphasize somewhat with a struggle, just not that particular struggle. So that was part of my formation. I remember my mom, she brought me to a protest. They were trying to close down our school. She had me carrying a sign saying, we need our teachers, with teachers misspelled intentionally to point out the fact that I was still young and I needed to learn how to spell, and I couldn't do that without a teacher or without a school. And that memory always stuck with me. And I guess it was part of my formation of myself. I am currently a father of a high school senior, ready to graduate early, ready to go off to college with a little break. And I've been a member of the Bridgeport Board of Education for the past 8 years. Although I am a Bridgeport Board of Education member and vice chair of the Bridgeport Board of Education, I am not speaking as such today. And the opinions I express are my own and not of the board. But the facts that I give you on this channel belong to everybody.
Nice. And tell us what's your passion? I think I can guess,
Yeah.
but tell us.
My passion is all things equity, especially around surrounding education. Because when I started getting involved in the board, it was like it was all around equity. My son was treated unfairly, and I started doing some research and came across some things that I didn't like about the science education in the system. Science has the least representation of Black and brown people, and my son's of mixed race, so it was of particular importance because there was a personal connection. As all things that mainly trigger activism and all that, it usually starts with a personal issue and becomes basically a larger crusade. And that's what happened. And as I did more and more research, I saw the funding disparities. I saw the separation and chasm between Black and brown and Caucasian school districts, and just the horrible mistreatment. And that's the state of Connecticut and its diversity. I mean, we got such wealth in this state, but it's spread so unevenly.
And when I contacted you and asked you to be a guest because uh, you're you've become, in my view, a symbol of an equity warrior in our state. You're not only taking this message to Bridgeport, you're taking it to Waterbury, you're taking it to New Haven, you're taking it around the state. It reminds me again, those of us that have studied Dr. King, before he gave that I have a dream speech. That dream speech had 100 practices along the way, everywhere he went. And so that you bring this message to the public. And I want to, you talked about your son, who's a biracial child, and unfairness and the wealth and the equity. So let's throw the elephant in the china cabinet. What's this got to do with racism?
Oh, the funding of Bridgeport's Waterbury, New Haven, all the inner city schools is tied to property tax, and property tax has a very good way of showing up in disparate outcomes in income because not all cities are property wealthy. And that's because of the past. The history of Connecticut, racism and discrimination in education did not start today. It started back in as soon as Connecticut was formed. Initially, education was just for white males, and then it expanded to females, and then so on and so forth, going down through history. And then they started funding the schools with public funds, but it was tied to property wealth. Now, with the history of redlining in the United States of America, Black and brown people were concentrated into certain areas. And that continues today through restrictive zoning. And the property wealth is kept down also by all these monolith property, government properties, non-taxable properties that the impoverished towns cannot tax and generate revenue. So when we were underfunded by the state, we can't make it up, as well as a city like Greenwich. The disparity in funding between Greenwich and Bridgeport is about $8,000 to $9,000 per pupil.
So we're getting this piece. We should also understand that the state of Connecticut, so we're gonna eventually talk about zoning and all these things in the school funding formula. But the state, we act like Bridgeport and New Haven and Waterbury and Hartford are begging at the trials, but actually their cities are full of state and federal buildings that pay no taxes at all. And this is one of the problems. And we don't put the courthouses, we don't put the big government buildings in Greenwich, in Avon, in Simsbury, because they wouldn't put up with that.
Correct.
Because they don't want that non-taxable property that they have to upkeep, clean the snow, keep the roads clean, and all that stuff over there that comes with it. So when we come to this stuff, the state gives money in replacement of all these buildings that are in our cities that are massive. So when I look at the courthouses, when I look at the governor's mansion and the governor's our Capitol building in Hartford, it dominates the downtown area. It's massive. What that would be in tax funds. So that's one. So I want to think about you. We talk about redlining and and penning in black and brown and white communities. What is that? What does people will say to me? Whoa, we're redlining. What is it? I think the public needs to know a little bit about that, Joe. Can you help us?
Well, red line was like historic. It was the historic segregation. Banks would not give loans to people black and brown. They would not approve loans in certain neighborhoods. And their subprime loans would be for the black and brown, and they would be pigeonholed into the red line neighborhoods because that's the only place that would sell to them. And it was reinforced after it was deemed illegal. It was reinforced by restrictive zoning. Restrictive zoning is you'll hear it's basically undercover racism. You'll hear code words like not a good fit with the neighborhood, poor character of the neighborhood, increased congestion, and all sorts of things to keep it in place today.
So the restrictive zoning, coding, and it's interesting. No other nations in the Western world fund their public schools like we do. There's no local property taxes that fund those schools. So the nation funds those schools. And right from the start in Western countries, there is equity in that funding. And actually, I remember doing a presentation at the European Reading Conference, and I had teachers from Denmark and Norway. They're always held up. And I had talked about this idea of a school to prison pipeline and the lack of services because I had a literacy center. I presented that. It provides free tutoring, about $500,000 a year free tutoring to local children, and everybody gets the same, one teacher, one-to-one. Everything is as equal as it can be, except those students. My teachers would quickly learn. Some come from districts where they'll get 12 hours of individual services in the course of a week. And in cities like New Britain next to us and Hartford, my teachers would quickly understand that their children were getting no services and stuff. So this concept. So we've got this idea, the reliance on property tax, that is part of a racist structure. Because if we really wanted to be fair, we turn around and we say, well, we can have a sales tax. We can have something else. Take state money and at least give everyone the same amount of money and same amount of increases. And that's not enough because when I went to Europe and I told them and I mentioned this, the school to prison pipeline and my Denmark teacher said, don't they know that's unethical? And the teacher from Norway, she said, shouldn't somebody be in jail? And really, that's why when I asked you to come on the show, I was cognizant that it was Dr. King's birthday today and not putting lots of pressure on you on that end. But the fight for equity, the fight for justice has never ended. And other countries think what we're doing is so corrupt. So we got that piece over there. So we have this thing, I don't know, the education school funding formula. Is
Yeah.
that it? Because I'm going to tell you, I have that's never made sense to me. What is it about? And how does it
Actually,
help poor kids?
right. Actually, it makes a certain kind of sense. That it came about because not only do all these other countries you mentioned think it's unfair the way the schools are funding, the state courts in Connecticut ruled that the funding structure of property taxes was unfair and disparately impacting and basically racist by the outcomes. I forget the term for
Yeah.
that. And the ECS formula was developed as a means to make up for that inequity in funding. And it has never been fully funded. It's been underfunded for years. There's currently a racial funding gap between Black and brown schools and Caucasian schools approaching $1 billion. I'm sure it'll crack. It's like 972 million at the current and the last fiscal year. And I'm sure if we don't change anything, it's going to crack $1 billion difference. For Bridgeport in particular, that means we're underfunded by $100 million. New Haven, Waterbury, somewhere similar, give or take $10 million on each side, on either end, depending upon their poverty levels. And it's strange because it hasn't risen. The inflation hasn't risen since 2013. It's been frozen in place. The foundation, what's called the foundation amount, the very basis of what it's supposed to cost to educate your typical child with no additional needs, no special needs, no extra tutoring, just run-of-the-mill child who could just sit through school and get through it with no issues and need of no supports. 11,525. Frozen in place since 2013. Now, I did some calculations with matched it up with the rate of inflation. So we're missing out on $100 million due to inflation. And coincidentally enough, why I say that the formula was pretty good, because if that $100 million was given, the equity gap would be gone. We would have equal amount of money on average for the rest of the district. Sure, there'll be some fluctuations here or there, but it would not be as stark.
And it's not like we're starving for money. There's a $5 billion surplus going on, and our governor doesn't seem to understand that the rainy day for our schools, our struggling schools in communities of color and poor communities is today. It's pouring right now. One of those pieces that I wanted to think about, are there any particular court cases that come to mind for you?
You got Horton versus Mesco, and what's a Chef versus O'Neill, and I think I'm not as familiar with the CCJEF as
Okay.
well, but
Yeah,
all of them laid the groundwork.
right, and then the Chef versus O'Neill. I had arrived in Connecticut when that decision was coming on, and people were hailing it as something, and something struck me as we had PDS schools in Hartford, and I thought at the bottom of that, it really came down to we will make things better for 25% of the students in those communities. And I knew right away, I said, what about the other 75%? And we want to understand how deep seated systemic racism is, because in our black and brown communities, 25% was something better than nothing. And so to celebrate it and to push it, and I understand that, and we've got magnet schools and all kinds of things came out of it, but really we should be asking ourselves that Dr. King would definitely ask us. He would say, well, what about the other 75%? And why
Absolutely.
can't you lift them all? And if you really care, would you not lift them all? So we've got that case. And I remember the CJEF case that you were in the state. And, so we had the Chef versus, O'Neill case. And that brought us the 25% over there and gave us charter schools, not charters, but magnets, and would save 25% from racial isolation. So, and it's kind of, it's hard to understand what all of this means, except that Connecticut, our legislators in the Capitol were quite comfortable with allowing 75% of our students in priority districts, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, Wyndham. I mean, I could go on. I think there's 19 of them at last count in those districts. And so that 75%, it was as if they didn't matter. And so, this component, and we had things like School Plus program, and we'll take three poor kids from Hartford and put them in a Simsbury school and stuff like that. And it all sounds good, but it doesn't change the fact that we're leaving 75% of our students behind. And when we say 75%, Joe, let's make it clear. That's the whole Bridgeport public school system. That's
Absolutely.
not 75%. It's 100% of them. So when we think about this education, formula for our schools, what would you suggest? Where could we start? You don't have to change it all overnight, but give us one simple step the state could take.
The simplest step would be to raise the foundation amount to $17,000, and that would eliminate the racial funding gap altogether, generate $100 million for Bridgeport. Every underfunded district would come up. Like I said, Waterbury and Hartford and all the other districts, they would get anywhere 10 from the smaller underfunded districts would get like 10 to 20, and it would help.
Everybody would get more. And something else that I've looked at. Uh, the state likes to control the funding it gives to our public schools. So maybe the state, and I'm always questioning this, might go out and say we got $144 million to buy new literacy curriculums. And they're doing this at the very time they're increasing class sizes. Where in Hartford, I don't know, maybe there's 3 or 4 librarians left out of the 48 schools in the district. We're getting rid of music teachers, art teachers, we're getting rid of counselors and social workers, but we're giving this money to a reform that I would say is destined to fail
Yes.
because it has no equity. Tell me about that. So the money, when the state comes through with some money for Bridgeport, does it let the city of Bridgeport and the Board of Ed, do they get to decide how that money's spent?
It depends on the way the money comes and what form it might come in the form of a grant. But I want to circle back a bit.
Sure, go ahead.
You were speaking on different forms of school and the results of only 25%. This is true. Um, However, when you were speaking, you were using the past tense. Legislators didn't. The governor doesn't see that. That is still the case today. It's not that the governor does not understand how funding works and all that. The governor is all too clear how money works. All too clear that money brings results. The governor told me personally when he came to Bridgeport, Connecticut for a tour that I don't want to fund Bridgeport public schools because money will not help.
Easy to say
Easy to say,
when you have a $5 billion surplus and you could give all the money to the things that you love. Yes, yes, easy to say. And I'm
right.
going to
That
say,
being said, I'm sorry. That
yeah,
being said,
go ahead, Joe.
would he go back to Greenwich, Connecticut, and tell them, hey, money's not the solution here. And Bridgeport could do it on $18,000 a student, man. Y'all wasting $9,000 for every student you got. You don't need that much money to spend on your kids, but they wouldn't do that. It only doesn't work in black and brown districts. And that 25% thing you brought up, when I look at Hartford, I feel worse for them than I do for Bridgeport sometimes because that so-called solution has increased their transportation costs because they got to pay for the buses to go out to all those other things and the racial isolation. And Bridgeport does actually suffer a little bit for like an offshoot because when you got the interdistrict magnet schools, which my son's a student in an interdistrict magnet school, full full clarity because what I'm about to say is
Okay.
going to sound hypocritical. They should not even exist because they own, like you said, they only got the 25%. My son's school is under enrolled by probably like 300 or 400 students due to the fact that we're not attracting suburban students. And for every suburban student that we attract, they'll give us money and so graciously allow three of our students to attend.
So it's interesting because when Horace Mann was dreaming of a public school system, uh, he would sell it with things saying things like money for schools now, prisons later, things like that. And but he would also say he wanted to build a public school system. And we could be critical of Horace Mann, but his theme was schools for the poor, good enough for the wealthy. That was his piece, and we have never delivered on that. Horace Mann himself became the first commissioner of education in the state of Massachusetts. He is the only commissioner of education in any state that has ever visited all the schools in his state. And he did that. He visited schools. He took notes like, oh, how's the heater? Is there a good supply of wood? What do their globes look like? What do their maps look like? On the windows. He was meticulous. And one of his last messages to the Massachusetts legislature was when they asked him, well, what's wrong with our public schools? Because some people say the teachers, some people say the students, some people say the parents. I mean, this has been going on for hundreds of years now, over 150 years. And Horace Mann turned around and told them the vast inequalities. This is the number one problem we face. And really, that's what we're talking about today. How do we solve these vast inequalities? How do we make certain that the student who in Avon gets 12 hours of individualized interventions in a week, and my student in maybe New Britain, maybe Hartford, maybe Bridgeport is lucky to get 30 minutes? They don't get to see a literacy specialist. They don't get to see the counselor. They don't get to see the special education teacher. I remember reading something, oh, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago, that Bridgeport had about half the amount of special education teachers they thought they should have, and that the state thought they should have. So this stuff is real in that sense, and they're historically underfunded. Would get that, and inflation comes in. So that's what one of the points you made earlier. You said, well, the school funding formula. Everybody knows inflation right now. All you got to do is go to the supermarket, and it's the same for our school. And you're saying all they need to do is follow the inflation, and we could solve. It's not we're going to solve everything. We're going to solve a major part
Catch up
of the
first,
inequity.
inflation. First, we
Yeah.
have to catch up.
So tell us, sort of like what and what can we do? Is there something we can do? I know why I contacted you to be a guest because you're doing something. I put your YouTube videos in the chat box so people can look at them and see them, and you continue to I know you've been going around the state to, I mean, you're the Bridgeport. Board of Ed person. You are the Bridgeport citizen. What are you doing in Waterbury? What are you doing in New Haven? What are you doing? Where are you going? So,
Well,
so tell us what we can do.
well, basically we got to spread the knowledge because that's the first thing. You mentioned the kids that are getting it 30 minutes in Bridgeport or Hartford or whatever have you. First thing you got to do is let the people that are getting the 30 minutes know that there's other people getting it 12 hours because you don't know what you're missing out on unless you've seen it. So the first portion of it's an education campaign. And the second part of it is an advocacy campaign and an activist campaign. I mean, it's really a holistic approach. There's no real one thing. Um, right now, I'm going around. I'm basically defying convention because once you get into elected office, it's really frowned upon to keep your activist hat on. That you're supposed to be a different kind of animal. But I refuse to stay silent. I did not become elected to restrict myself and restrict my First Amendment rights and to support the system. I'm not there to support the system of inequity. I'm there to either fix it or destroy it and start from scratch.
So
So
comes to
what people could do individually is call the governor, call the state reps. I mean, it'll be helpful if all of our alliance districts and underfunded people would let the governor know, hey, we may not be able to swing the legislator to give it the money, but we could sure swing the governor's race that's coming up if you don't fund our schools.
so so I'm hearing a theme, and I wrote in the chat box: inform, educate, and train people or help people to act. It can be as simple as a phone call to a legislature. It could be a letter to the governor. It could be attending a rally, and these kinds of things. But the main thing is to act. And so when my grandfather went to D.C. in 1968 in his three-piece wool suit with his fedora. I like hats because my grandfather loved hats. And it was so hot. And I remember when he let me take my jacket off. Then he let me take my tie off. But he acted. So here's a veteran of foreign war. He's 68 years old. Most people would say, well, it's time for the retirement. It's time to sit back and let the young ones do it. But he did something. He went to DC. It defined him, and it crushed him to live in a decade where we would see John F. Kennedy assassinated. We would see Malcolm X assassinated. We would see Martin Luther King assassinated. We'd see Bobby Kennedy assassinated. When Bob Marley sings redemption songs, he talks about they kill our prophets. Those were my grandfather's prophets. But I want to come in, and he was a staunch Democrat, just to let you know, and that stuff. So I wanted to go because you're a member of the Working Families Party, and what is that? And why that option? Why are you not a Democrat? Why are you not trying to change the system from within? Or why not be a Republican? Why working family parties?
I got to bring you a step back because, again, full disclosure, until I was 23, well, no, I was a Republican. I was a conservative Republican up
There you
until
go.
I was probably 23, 24 years old, but I had sort of an evolution. It's an evolutionary process to get me from a conservative Republican to basically working families parties where most of my values are today. As a pull yourself up by your bootstrap Republican, but I slowly realized not everybody even had boots to pull themselves up by. And I started realizing that I had some views. While I never considered myself racist, I did have a lot of blind spots. And the first time I noticed implicit bias within myself was one day at work. I used to work for the subways, cleaning. So this gentleman, I can't call him African American, a black fella came up to me and asked me a question. And he had a British accent. That's why I couldn't call him African American. And I looked at that man like he had two heads because I had never heard a British accent out of an African individual. And he gave me such a look of disgust as the doors closed on the train. And I was like, thought to myself, you idiot. black people could be born anywhere. And that's the start of the process of me questioning myself and how I thought and stuff. And it just started me on a journey to where I got today. It was a slow process. And it really went into high gear when I started getting involved with my son's education and seeing all those disparities I mentioned about the sciences, about the education system and the funding. And at first, it began with alliances with the Working Families Party. I was cross endorsed by the Republican and Working Families Party, uh, which is an odd combination because,
Yeah.
but it works for me because there's no real one party while I'm a Working Families Party member, and I'm saying spend all this money on education. I am still a fiscal conservative, and the way I sell this stuff to fiscal conservative is education is the best investment you can make with your money and get the best return on that investment. And the Working Families part of me, that investment has to be equitably distributed to everybody.
So and it's interesting. So you've grown, you've changed, you've done all the things that we want people to do. It's sad if politically we are standing today where we stood 20, 30 years ago. If we have not, adapted, adjusted, and changed our opinions, if that's about as sad a status quo as we can be. And I'm wondering because the Working Family Party, the Republican Party, and you're saying you'll sell it to the Republicans by fiscal conservatism, and I wonder if you were a member of the Democratic Party, could you be so critical of this governor?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you mentioned things going on in the federal. That's probably one of the best things that happened to Governor Lamont's re-election chances because now he could deflect from the responsibility of Connecticut because Connecticut, this underfunding problem, you talked about it going back 30, 40 years. You talked about it going back, we talked about it going back historically to the 1900s. Um, this problem has existed, racial discrimination, since Connecticut's inception. It didn't start with Trump. I could tell you, if I do a few calculations, I could tell you exactly how much Bridgeport Public Schools lost in federal funding since Trump been in office. Oh, wait, no, a zero. I don't got to add up anything. Every single cut that I've had to make since I've been in office has been on a Democratic governor for the Democratic Party. The problem is we got corporate Democrats in office. And the problem is we got dinos, Democrats in name only, who are likely probably Republicans, wealthy, super uber wealthy, serving in office, doing a service for their community, which in fact is a disguise for a service in itself. When you talk about paying for schools and funding and the guardrails and all that, that's to protect the wealthy from a potential tax hike. And by virtue of staying in office, the governor protects his millions and millions of dollars of interest in income from a surtax, a possible surtax in the future, by keeping those guardrails up and make sure we don't spend our way into his pocket.
So we've got a party and a governor and a state that's very comfortable being regressive. Even our income tax is regressive. The poorer you are, the higher the rate you pay. When I say this to people outside Connecticut, because they think we are the beautiful, equitable land, perfect schools, perfect stuff, and because I'm from New Jersey, and we've always thought Connecticut was perfect when I was young, and stuff. But so we've got this piece, and I want to go back. It's not just Connecticut. So, and I forget when it was 64, it might be 1964. I don't have my notes in front of me. But when the Elementary and Secondary Act became law and was created, what people forget is Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats primarily voted to create this act. And in the act was written that we would give a 45% increase into urban and rural poor schools. And the day the legislation was set into focus, that percent disappeared. And so there, the Americans for School Realliance talks about that number, saying we're literally talking about hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars owed to these schools and that piece. But yes, we. So when I look at it, I don't think this is by error. I think this is intentional. So that's why when we began and I said, what's this got to do with racism? To me, it's racism 101. When a pastor got stopped in Minnesota, he was a white pastor, in his clergy outfit and stuff, and they were pretty easy on him and they let him go. And the pastor told his congregation, if I was black or I was brown, it would not be that easy over there. And we live in this nation where we can do racial profiling. They're not going to ask me what country I come from.
Mm.
But if I'm at Home Depot or Lowe's, and I was Hispanic or I was black, they'll be asking those kinds of questions over there. And that's why even, what is it, Joe Rogan says, this new ICE front is like the Gestapo of Germany. They're asking us for our papers and
Yeah.
things like that. And they're only asking certain people. So racism has something to do with it. Maybe it has everything to do with it. Maybe America, since the Civil War, has had a war on black people, a war on immigrants. So this, and I know I'm getting out of that piece for you, but uh, I want you to tell us like interventions for our largest priority school districts, the black and brown students. Uh, some ideas that we could have. If you could rewrite the school funding formula, what would you include in that? I don't now I'm taking you off more, but I hope you understand that. I'm sorry, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I would just start implementing it as it is. Like I said, the fund formula is a decent way to deliver the money because when you do all those when you do all the sliders and affect it, that $17,000 foundation, like I said, it gives $100 million. You could even increase it to 18, 19, 20, whatever have you, whatever number you need to get to where you need to be. And that number really only affects the larger inner city urban schools, and it doesn't land on the schools that are funding themselves. So it's a proper metric, but it's never been implemented. So I wouldn't suggest trashing the thing altogether. I mean, unless we could have a utopian society that does the right thing on its own without a need for a barometer. And
And
that's not the case. And you mentioned intervention. Now, I'm gonna jump on that because
good.
Bridgeport and Hartford, the two largest black and brown underfunded districts in the state of Connecticut, rather than the state properly funding us, are intervening in our affairs, intervening in local control, using it as a distraction and deflection from the state of Connecticut's underfunding of our schools. Yeah, can we use improvement? Sure, but work with us, talk with us. We had a very productive meeting with the state yesterday. It seems we may be allowed to move on with our superintendent search, but for them to come in and sit down with their technical assistance team, they're like, "Oh, you don't have enough people in these positions. You need to hire somebody there." Like this costs
That 100 million would help.
yeah. There's not one suggestion that came out of Hartford and the technical teams that did not cost money.
And
And the deflection is real. At the same day I told you that Lamont told me that he don't want to fund the schools, he went on the news and he said that leadership was letting them down. We were paying administrators too much money. Now I can segue from there because when we're forced to make cuts, the first place I'm going to look is outside the classroom, and that's going to be the top level administrators. However, for Ned Lamont to make that statement at a point in time when the city of Bridgeport had the same exact amount of administrators as Greenwich, Connecticut, is very telling. So you can have 17 administrators and we cannot have 17 administrators. We need much more administrators than we have because we've got a lot more. We got directors doing double duty, taking over two things. Some districts have coordinators of homeless services and a coordinator of this, coordinator of that. Things we can only dream of. The administrative positions are needed, but when it comes down to cuts, it's a not as needed as front facing positions. So I'm kind of in a there. But how dare you say we have too many administrators and you didn't want to fund us to distract and deflect from you irresponsibly not raising the foundation amount. It's been done before. Governor Jody Rell raised the foundation amount by $4,000 per pupil. Dan Malloy raised it by 1680 or 1860. I'm not sure if I got my numbers where my numbers are. I don't have them in front of me. But it is able to be done. And you know what? Those two governors did not have? They did not have a $200 million, 200 billion, wait, no, sorry, $2 billion surplus in the last fiscal year. To implement the plan, I've been pushing about $17,000, 17,000 for the foundation amount. It costs a little over $1 billion. So if you look at it, that surplus is built on the backs of the Black and brown children's education and their future prospects.
So yes, we've got this concept of um, that it's racing, but we also, to paraphrase Coretta Scott King, that underfunding our poor schools is violence against children. That kind of concept. So we're committing violence against children. And I remember a long time ago, I was with CEA's Rosamondo, I think, and he was saying, Jesse, we were talking about the school funding formula, and he was explaining it to me, sort of like you're explaining, and how we could do this and we could do that. He worked for CEA, he's a good guy, and he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd get rid of the high stakes assessment. It's too costly. It takes too much time from learning. Testing is not learning. And the more testing we do in our school, the less learning we're doing. I said, number one. But I said I would start rewarding priority school districts for having smaller class sizes. Give them the carrot and say you'll get extra funding if you reduce your class size. If you hire the special education teachers you need, the literacy specialists you need, you hire them. If you keep your librarians. So when I look at Harvard, I get very upset when I think I was poor. I was a homeless kid, but there was a library in our school and there was a librarian. And what are homeless kids? What are they like? They're like the library. We don't have TVs. We don't have that stuff. So a book, reading became my safety line. So I get upset to think that these are things we've been cutting. And just before, because we're going to start going, I'm going to say we're going to shift to the positive, the advocacy talking points and stuff. We're going to move to that. Because believe it or not, time starts flowing. We've got about 7 minutes left. But I I wonder when our governors, and it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, doesn't really matter who they are or what party they belong to, but when do we have the moral, decency and understanding that Dr. King had? When Dr. King was assassinated, he had less than $300 in his banking account.
Oh,
Uh, he was not a wealthy man, and every time he got money, he put it into his church and his community and the movement. That's what he did. But where's the moral compass? And this is not the question. This is for the audience because I want to move us to you have in talking points. You talked about advocacy stuff, but I'm wondering where is the moral compass of a public school system that underfunds its poorest schools, uh, and that moral compass is broken. And it's probably a place to go. But let's ship that and let's ship to when I've taken some notes when we conversed, you said you wanted to talk about advocacy talking points. And I don't want to lose them. As the time goes, we've got about 5 minutes before Harry starts playing the music and stuff. And so let's go to that. Are there advocacy talking points? Why don't we just let it all be?
Right. Yeah, we can't. It would be irresponsible of us as adults, as community members, as fiduciaries and boards of education. That's why I've been going around trying to get people to come out and advocate. When we go to Hartford, there's never enough people up there. I mean, everybody can do something. You can write a letter. You write a letter to write a letter to the editor, write a letter to the state, write a letter to the governor, write a letter to your mayors. Some of our mayors and cities could do a little better, but I'm focused on the state right now because we got the election cycle, and that's where the pressure could be brought right now. Um, yeah, ask for at least the foundation amount to be raised by at least $17,000. That's the main primary focus, and adjust some of the weights for the poverty weight, adjust the English language learner rate, because those are the highest cost people to educate, and add a weight for special education to the formula. And that would give basically all districts some money because all districts have a lot of increased special education costs. And tell them no more unfunded mandates. If
No
you
more
mandate something,
unfunded mandates.
if you mandate something, pay for it in perpetuity.
Right. And why don't we mandate equity? Why don't we mandate fairness? Why don't we mandate a nurse in every school, a librarian in every school, and a library? Why don't we mandate literacy specialists at every school, special education teachers, counselors, social workers, music teachers, art teachers, you know, sports programs. The difference between sports in Bridgeport and sports in Greenwich is they have a whole lot of different teams for kids to choose from. When I grew up in my little ghetto community, we had basketball, football, and we had baseball. Even though the community was a bigger soccer community at the time because we're an immigrant community, but we had no soccer team. Oh, we did have a tennis team. We thought that was pretty cool. But I'm saying the inequity stretches across there. So we got this concept that we can do stuff. You're doing stuff by traveling. You could easily just stay in Bridgeport and, be at sing to the choir that you know best, and they'll all applaud and clap. But you're taking risk. You're saying, well, I'm going to see, let me see, go to Waterbury. Good. You mentioned Hartford. Well, I had Rob, what is it, Jerome on just a few weeks ago, and I wanted him on because Bridgeport, you still have an elected school board and you fought for that and you won elections. The money was against you. Hartford lost. And Hartford changed it, and it's now the mayor controls the school board. I remember when Eddie Perez was the mayor, and he made himself the chairman of the school board. They didn't even have a chairman's position. He just decided I would be the chairman. So that gave him 6 votes to 4 elected positions. And I would say, so while both school districts are struggling, the reason you're not, but maybe we're not finding people in Hartford at these meetings is that they don't control their schools. They can't throw. I mean, it's hard to get rid of a mayor. It's
Yeah,
not easy to
yeah.
do that. You and I know that. But we can get rid of a Board of Ed member with probably like 800 votes, maybe 1,500 votes. Can change that, and I could do that when you take that away. So just quickly, what's the difference between an elected school board and giving the mayor complete control?
Oh, well, money, basically. You do not want the mayor to be in control of the school budget. The legislator, and one of the wisest moves they made is they separated the powers of boards of education from the city and made us direct creatures of the state rather than a city department of the city. Because one of the most tempting targets in lean budget times is the school budget because they are a significant portion of the city governance. So when I look at Hartford and I think of the racial discrimination and everything going on, I see the mayor is actually stopping some schools from being built that are basically already funded, being built and repaired, and their children are sitting around in those schools. And he's overstepping his authority, even though he's got excess authority.
So it's not a good thing.
Not at all.
to have a non-elected school board. And when Robert Codall, who is Dr. Codall's at Trinity College, often writes about these things, was on board with the CJEF case back then and has been a guest on my show and was a TED talker for me when I did TED talks out of Central. And Robert asked the basic question: how come democracy is not good for black and brown people?
Mm.
How come is it only good for white people over there? And that concept, so it brings us back to racism and stuff. So, but coming back to the advocacy thing, you said we can make phone calls, we can write letters, we could attend meetings. It would have been nice if when you
Absolutely.
went to Harvard, a troubled school district, if hundreds of people came out to see
Absolutely.
you and have a real conversation. And then it wouldn't take long for people that are saying, why don't we have an elected school board might come up. I'm not saying it would, but it might over there. In New Haven, we close schools that communities want open. So I forget what the school was closed last year, but it was a small school that the community was very happy with. We've closed since the No Child Left Behind Act and the focus on high stakes assessment. We have closed 25,000 public schools, community schools in diverse communities in America. That's over 1,000 a year. That means it impacts almost every community in there. So we've got that stuff. So we can write, we can attend meetings, we can make phone calls. Maybe we could do what your mother did with you.
So
And maybe we could have you can do some signs. How about that? Is there somewhere we could protest?
yeah. I would say when legislation session starts, whenever there's public testimony, everybody activate. All the school districts grab a bus, bring up some constituents, the NAACP, ACLU. Everybody needs to be all hands on deck because this issue of education touches everything. If we get education right, you get healthcare right, you get housing right, because an educated population will not be kept down.
There will be educated voters. We're coming to the end of our show. I want to say thank you, Joe. Thank you for being an informative guest, for sharing your passion for equity and informing us. And I want you to keep informing and educating and help us to act. I'm hoping you'll come back again. I'm hoping we can get a couple of board members from across districts that have this equity piece in there. But this is your host, Dr. Jesse Turner, on 103.5 WNHH, New Haven, Connecticut. And I think Harry gave me the 1 minute time. We did it.
Yes.
Thank you,
so
Joe.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.